The moment I walked through the front doors of Harlow and Pine, the restaurant my husband had spent the last 18 months building with my money, the first thing I noticed was that he had changed the font on the logo. It was a small thing. A ridiculous thing to notice when you are standing in the entrance of a place where every chair, every copper pendant light, every single reclaimed oak plank on the wall had been purchased with funds wired from your personal investment account. But the logo had been my idea. I had sketched it on a paper napkin at our kitchen table 2 winters ago, a clean serif typeface with a small botanical detail on the H. He had loved it. He had kissed me on the forehead and said I had perfect taste, and that was exactly why he needed me. Now it was different. Rounder, softer, more feminine. The kind of update you make when someone else starts weighing in on your decisions. I stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough to take it in. The hostess, a young woman I had never met, looked up from her podium with a practiced smile. The reservation list was in her hand. Behind her, the dining room was glowing. Every table was set with the ivory linen napkins I had approved from a supplier in Charleston. The locally sourced candles I had personally driven 2 hours to select from an artisan in Asheville were burning down their wicks in real time. The exposed brick wall on the east side, the one I had argued my husband into keeping when the contractor wanted to drywall over it, was now the backdrop for a photograph of him and the woman he had been sleeping with for at least the better part of a year. The photograph was enormous, framed in raw steel. The two of them standing in the empty restaurant before opening, laughing at something outside the frame. It looked like an editorial spread from a food magazine. It looked like a love story. It looked like everything I had funded. I smoothed the front of my blazer, adjusted the strap of my bag, and smiled at the hostess. I am not here for a table, I told her. I am here for a conversation. 6 weeks earlier, I had found out about the soft opening the same way I found out about most things in my marriage during those final months. By accident. A mutual friend had texted me a screenshot of a local food blogger's Instagram story. Candlelight, a charcuterie board, the copper bar top I had agonized over for 3 weeks. The caption read, "Sneak peek at Portland's most anticipated opening." And right there in the background, half turned toward the camera, was my husband. His arm around a woman I had seen exactly once before, at a contractor meeting, when he had introduced her as his new operations manager. I had sat on the edge of our bed for a long time after that, not crying, just calculating. We had been married for 4 years. He had come to me with the restaurant concept 2 years into our marriage, during a period when his catering business was hemorrhaging money, and his confidence was fraying at the edges. I was 31, working in commercial real estate acquisitions for a firm headquartered in Portland, and I had spent the previous 3 years building a very quiet, very deliberate financial foundation for myself. I had a salary that made people uncomfortable when they asked about it at dinner parties. I had an investment portfolio managed by someone I trusted, and I had a separate holding company, a small LLC called Meridian Asset Group, that I had established on the advice of my financial attorney 2 years before I even met my husband. He never asked much about Meridian. I never volunteered. When he pitched me on Harlow and Pine, he had a business plan, a mood board, and the kind of raw, desperate passion that is very easy to mistake for vision when you love someone. He needed $480,000 to secure the space, complete the build-out, and fund the first year of operations. He was going to be the executive chef and the face of the brand. He had the talent. He absolutely had the talent. That part was never in question. I wired the money in 3 tranches over 8 months. Each wire originated from Meridian Asset Group's commercial account. In exchange, per the investment agreement drafted by my attorney and signed by both of us, Meridian held a 62% ownership stake in the restaurant's parent LLC and a commercial lien on all physical assets totaling the value of the initial investment. He had read the agreement. He had signed it. I had watched him sign it at our kitchen table with a glass of wine in his free hand, and he had kissed me again on the forehead and called me his safety net. Men like my husband are very good at seeing what they want to see. After the Instagram screenshot, I did not confront him. I did not cry into a phone call with my best friend. I called my attorney, a woman named Carolyn who had a reputation in Portland's legal community for being precisely as warm and forgiving as a nor'easter. I told her what I had found, what I suspected, and what I wanted to do about it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence on her end of the line. Then she said, "Good thing you kept Meridian clean." 3 weeks later, the restaurant had its grand opening. A real one, with a press list, and a reservation wait list, and a private pre-service reception for what my husband called his inner circle. I was not on the guest list. I know because I checked. I had quietly cultivated a connection with one of the front-of-house managers he had hired, a sharp young woman named Rosa, who had reached out to me early in the build-out process to confirm delivery schedules and equipment specs. Rosa knew whose money had built the place. Rosa and I had a quiet understanding. He had not invited me because I was not part of the story he was telling anymore. I was the financial infrastructure, invisible and load-bearing, the same way a foundation is invisible until the building starts to sink. When he called me 4 days after the opening, his voice had the particular tight quality of a man who is trying very hard to sound casual about something that is making him sweat straight through his shirt. "Hey," he said. "So, the first week was incredible, fully booked through the end of the month. I just need you to cover one more thing before we start pulling revenue. The walk-in refrigeration unit that was installed in March has a warranty issue and the repair invoice is sitting at $11,000. Can you wire that this week?" I was sitting in my car in the parking garage beneath my office building. I looked at the concrete pillar in front of me for a moment. "Marcus," I said slowly, as if I were trying to understand something very basic. "You just had your grand opening. You have reservations through the end of the month. Why is the operational account not covering an $11,000 repair invoice?" He laughed. It was the particular laugh of a man who has been caught slightly off balance and is trying to recover. "It is just cash flow timing, babe. The revenue hasn't cleared yet. It will all even out by next quarter." "I see," I said. "So can you wire it?" "I'll think about it," I told him. I hung up and sat in the parking garage for 3 more minutes. Then I called Carolyn and told her it was time. The hostess was still smiling at me when my attorney stepped through the door behind me, followed by 2 representatives from Cascadia Commercial Recovery, the asset management firm Carolyn had engaged on Meridian's behalf. They were both wearing jackets, with the company name embroidered on the chest. They were both carrying clipboards. They looked the way professionals always look when they have done this particular job many times before. Efficient, unhurried, entirely unimpressed by the decor. Behind them, 2 Portland police officers in full uniform stepped inside. The hostess's smile flickered. The reservation book dropped an inch in her hands. Carolyn stepped up beside me. She was wearing a dark wool coat and carrying a leather portfolio that contained, among other things, a signed enforcement order from Multnomah County Civil Court authorizing the immediate exercise of Meridian Asset Group's lien rights against all physical assets of Harlow and Pine LLC. "We are not here to disrupt your evening," Carolyn said to the hostess, with the kind of professional warmth that contains absolutely no warmth. "We are here to speak with the owner of record. Please let him know that the principals of Meridian Asset Group are on site." The hostess looked at the officers. The officers looked at their shoes. The hostess picked up the house phone. I heard my husband's voice carry from the back of the dining room before I saw him. He was mid-sentence, laughing at something, and then Rosa must have appeared at his elbow because the laughing stopped, and a few seconds later his face appeared from around the corner of the service bar. He saw me first. The expression that crossed his face moved through several stages very quickly. Confusion, then recognition, then something that tried very hard to be confidence and landed instead on panic wearing a sport coat. He walked across the dining room toward me. The restaurant was full. Every table occupied, low jazz playing through the overhead speakers. Exactly the atmosphere he had spent 18 months and my $480,000 building. Heads at nearby tables were beginning to turn. "What are you doing here?" he said, low and tight, stopping about 4 feet away from me. His eyes moved from my face to Carolyn to the men with the clipboards to the officers and back to me. His jaw tightened. "I am here representing Meridian Asset Group," I said. I kept my voice the same temperature as the room. "Meridian holds a 62% ownership stake in this LLC and a perfected commercial lien on all physical assets currently on these premises. That lien is in default." He blinked. "What are you talking about?" The lien entered default status when the operational account failed to make its first scheduled repayment to Meridian, which was due on the 1st of last month. Carolyn, would you like to walk him through the enforcement notice? Carolyn opened the portfolio and handed him a document that was several pages long and featured the county court's seal at the top. He took it the way people take documents they do not want to read, gripping the edges without looking at the words. "This is insane," he said. "You cannot just walk in here on opening night." Carolyn tilted her head slightly. "The notice of default was delivered to your registered agent 3 weeks ago, Mr. Harlow. The cure period has elapsed. We are well within our legal rights under the terms of the original investment agreement." His jaw moved. He looked at me again. There was something behind his eyes that I recognized from 4 years of marriage. He was looking for the version of me that would soften, the version that had wired money at 11 o'clock at night because he sounded stressed, the version that had driven 2 hours for candles. That version had been retired. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, louder now. He was performing for the dining room, turning his voice up just enough that the nearby tables could not pretend not to hear. "She is my wife. She is going through a difficult time, and she is trying to sabotage something I have built." Carolyn looked at him the way a person looks at a weather forecast they find mildly inconvenient. "Mr. Harlow, I would strongly encourage you not to make public statements about the nature of this proceeding. The enforcement order is signed by a county judge. The officers are here to ensure the lawful execution of the court's directive. Anything you say in this room is being recorded." He looked at the officers. One of them gave him a small, professional nod. From the far side of the restaurant, I saw her stand up. My husband's operations manager, the woman from the photograph on the wall, was rising from a corner table where she had apparently been seated with 2 other people who looked like investors or press. She was younger than me by at least 6 years, wearing a dress that had clearly been chosen for this specific evening, and she was looking at my husband with an expression caught somewhere between alarm and calculation. She was pretty. I want to be honest about that because the story is better when you are honest about things like that. She was pretty and she was clearly intelligent and she had clearly understood, faster than my husband had, that something irreversible was happening. "Marcus," she said, reaching the edge of our group. She put her hand on his arm. "What is going on?" He covered her hand with his briefly, a gesture so automatic he probably did not realize he was doing it. "It is fine," he said, which is what people say when things are not fine. The 2 men from Cascadia exchanged a glance, and then quietly, without making a production of it, they began moving through the dining room. One of them stopped at the host stand and began photographing the equipment. The other moved toward the bar. Marcus turned back to me, and I could see the shift happening in real time. He had decided to try a different approach. His voice dropped, went private, went to a register I had heard before in arguments that eventually ended with one of us sleeping on the couch. "Look," he said, "can we please just step outside and talk about this like adults? You have made your point. I hear you. But there are people in here who have taken a chance on this restaurant. Investors, press, people whose opinion matters for the future of this business. You are going to torpedo everything before we even have a chance to get started." I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the phone call, the $11,000 refrigeration invoice, the casual assumption that I would wire the money because I always wired the money. I thought about the logo with the different font. "The 62% ownership stake that Meridian holds," I said, "means that I am not torpedoing your business. I am exercising authority over my own business. And as the majority interest holder, I am initiating the dissolution of this LLC and the liquidation of its physical assets to satisfy the outstanding lien." "That is not how this works," he said. Carolyn smiled, small and precise. "That is exactly how this works, Mr. Harlow." He turned to her. He was vibrating now, the controlled panic of someone who has been absolutely certain of something and is watching that certainty come apart in public. He raised his voice. "I have guests in this building," he said. "I have reservations. I have a staff. You cannot liquidate a functioning restaurant in the middle of dinner service. I will call my own attorney and I will get an emergency injunction." Carolyn reached into the portfolio and produced a second document. "You are welcome to attempt that," she said, handing it to him. "However, You should know that Meridian has already filed a preemptive motion addressing injunctive relief. The court ruled on it this morning. There is no stay available." His hand closed around the document. His knuckles went white. Something from across the room caught his eye and his face changed. I turned to follow his gaze. Rosa, who had worked at the host stand all evening and who had been watching the whole proceedings with the careful stillness of someone trying to be invisible, had quietly approached one of the Cascadia representatives and handed him a folded piece of paper. It was the list I had asked her to compile weeks ago. Every major piece of kitchen equipment, the walk-in units, the commercial range, the custom hood ventilation system, every piece of furniture, the sound system, the POS terminals, serial numbers, purchase dates, values. I asked her for it as a precaution. I had told her at the time. She had nodded like she understood completely. She had been paid well for her time. Marcus stared at Rosa. Rosa stared at the middle distance with an expression of profound professional neutrality. "You had someone on the inside," he said. He turned back to me. He was speaking quietly now, and the quietness was worse than the volume. "You planned this. You planned all of this." "I have been planning this since the soft opening I was not invited to," I said. The recovery of assets took approximately 40 minutes. The dining room cleared faster than you might expect. There is something about uniformed officers and men with clipboards that makes a beautifully set restaurant table lose its appeal very quickly. Guests gathered their coats and their things with the particular hurried politeness of people who want very badly to be somewhere else and are willing to leave an untouched entree to get there. The press contacts evaporated within 15 minutes. The investors my husband had been courting all evening followed shortly after, pausing only long enough to collect business cards they would never use. The kitchen staff, to their credit, stayed professional through the whole thing. The chef de cuisine, a quiet man from New Orleans who had no idea his new employer's funding structure was a ticking clock, supervised the shutdown of the line with the kind of calm competence that told me he had worked in chaotic kitchens before. My husband's operations manager had been standing at the edge of the room through most of it. I noticed her watching the Cascadia representatives work. She was doing the same thing I had done 6 weeks earlier in a parking garage. She was calculating. She approached me while my husband was on the phone in the hallway, pacing, talking to someone in the clipped, low voice of a person making calls they did not want to make. She stopped about 3 feet away from me and looked at me with an expression that was surprisingly direct. "Did he ever put my name on any of the legal documents?" she asked. "No," I said. She exhaled slowly. "Is there anything coming back on me personally?" "You were listed as an employee and operational manager, not an equity stakeholder," I said. Carolyn reviewed the employment agreements. "You are not a party to the lien or the LLC dissolution." She nodded once. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, more like recalibration. "He told me she, meaning me, was a silent investor who had agreed to take a back seat once the restaurant opened," she said. "He said you two had a formal separation agreement that included the restaurant as his asset." I looked at her for a moment. "There was no separation agreement," I said. "We were married. He asked me to fund his dream. I did. He cut me out of it." She looked at the wall. At the photograph of herself and my husband, the enormous one in the raw steel frame. Her expression moved through something complicated and private. "That photograph cost $400 to print and frame," she said, almost to herself. "He asked me to expense it to the restaurant account." I did not say anything. She looked back at me. "For what it is worth," she said. "I did not know the full picture. I am not saying that to ask for your sympathy. I am saying it because it is true, and I thought you should hear it from me directly." I believed her. I want to be honest about that too. "What will you do?" I asked. She looked at the front doors. "Go home," she said. "Call my own attorney in the morning. Figure out if I have any wage claims against an LLC that is being dissolved." She paused. "Probably update my resume." She picked up her coat from the back of a chair and walked out. She did not look at the photograph on the wall. She did not look for my husband in the hallway. She simply left with the focused efficiency of someone who has assessed the situation and chosen the fastest exit. My husband did not notice she was gone until 20 minutes later. He came back from the hallway looking like he had aged. I do not say that dramatically. There is a particular quality of exhaustion that sets into a person's face when they understand for the first time that the thing they believed was solid is not solid, that the version of the future they had been living toward has dissolved, and that the dissolution happened through a process they initiated themselves without realizing it. He stood in the empty dining room, the candles still burning, the jazz still playing through the speakers because no one had thought to turn it off, and he looked around at the space. "Where did she go?" he asked. "Home," I said. He turned to look at me. The anger was gone. What was left was something I found harder to look at. Confusion. A genuine, disoriented confusion. "I don't understand," he said. "I don't understand how you did this." "You signed an investment agreement," I said. Carolyn made sure it was airtight. "I mean how you knew, how you were prepared." I looked at him across the room that had been built on my trust, and my capital, and my very deliberate habit of protecting both. "Because I read everything I sign," I said. "And I never funded anything I could not reclaim." He sat down on one of the stools at the bar. The copper bar top, the one I had spent 3 weeks agonizing over, caught the candlelight and threw it back in amber shades. He sat there with his hands on the bar and he did not say anything for a long moment. "I still have the lease," he finally said. "It is in my name. 5-year commercial lease. You cannot take my location." I let him have that sentence. I let it sit there between us for exactly the count of 4. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a document that was much thinner than the others. A single page with the letterhead of Morrison and Webb Commercial Properties. "That is the management company for this building," I said. "They have been a client of my firm for 6 years. I handled the acquisition of this property for their portfolio in 2019. He looked at the document. His brow furrowed. "I flagged this space to my firm 2 years ago as a potential investment," I said. "Meridian acquired a silent equity stake in the building's ownership structure 14 months ago. That is not public information, and it was not required to be disclosed to you as a commercial tenant. The lease you signed is with Morrison and Webb. Morrison and Webb has a silent equity partner who holds approval authority over tenant agreements in the event of financial or legal default." He was staring at the page. His mouth had stopped moving. "The default on Meridian's lien constitutes a breach of the tenant conduct clause in your commercial lease," I said. "Combined with the evidence of financial misrepresentation in the original loan application, which Carolyn has already submitted to the property's legal counsel, Morrison and Webb has issued a notice of lease termination, effective 30 days from today." He looked up at me. His face was the color of uncooked dough. "You own the building," he said. "I am a partial equity stakeholder in the entity that owns the building," I said. "Yes." The silence was total. Even the jazz seemed to pull back. "You planned this from the beginning," he said again. His voice had no texture left in it. "I planned it from the moment you stopped looking at me like a partner and started looking at me like a resource," I said. "I hoped I would never have to use it. I want you to know that. I genuinely hoped we would be fine." He put his face in his hands. His shoulders moved. I stood across the bar from him and I felt a grief that was clean and contained, the kind you feel when something has already died and you are only now attending the burial. One of the officers appeared in the doorway and looked at me. I nodded once. "Mr. Harlow," the officer said, "we need to finish the inventory and secure the premises. You are welcome to collect personal belongings that are not part of the asset list. You have 15 minutes. Marcus did not move for a long moment. Then he stood up from the bar stool, slowly, like a man getting up from a floor he had not meant to fall on. He walked past me toward the hallway. He stopped just beside me, close enough that I could smell the cedar of the jacket he had bought specifically for tonight. He did not look at me. "I really did love you," he said. "I know," I said. He kept walking. 7 months later, Portland was in that particular stretch of late spring when the rain finally means it, heavy green and bright, and the city has the quality of a place that has decided to try again. I was in my office on the 14th floor, reviewing the quarterly performance summary for the project that had taken over the Harlow and Pine space after the lease formally terminated. I had not reopened a restaurant. That was never my vision. What I had done, in partnership with 2 colleagues from my firm and a community development nonprofit I had been quietly involved with for 3 years, was convert the space into something I had wanted to see in Portland for a long time. A mixed-use professional center for women in transition, part co-working space, part resource hub, part incubator for women who were starting over after divorce, job loss, or financial crisis, and who needed a clean, professional environment in which to do it. The copper bar top was still there. I kept it because it was beautiful and I had excellent taste. Everything else had been reimagined from the ground up. The enormous photograph in the raw steel frame had been replaced with a rotating gallery of work by local women artists. The east brick wall I had argued the contractor into keeping was now the most photographed backdrop in the building. We were 6 months into operation and already at 90% capacity. My phone lit up on the corner of my desk. An automated notification from my bank. A direct deposit had cleared into Meridian's account. I opened the notification and looked at the figure. It was modest, the kind of figure that would have felt like a rounding error in the context of the original investment. But it was steady, court-ordered and garnished directly from his employer's payroll. Every month, on the 15th, for the next 19 years. He had filed for bankruptcy approximately 6 weeks after the restaurant closed. Carolyn had anticipated it. She had already prepared the documentation demonstrating that the debt to Meridian had been obtained through material misrepresentation, specifically his failure to disclose the investment agreement's terms to his secondary lenders, which constituted fraud under federal bankruptcy code. The debt survived his filing. The judge had been concise about it. "You signed a contract," she had said. "You knew what you were signing. The court does not offer fresh starts to people who started by deceiving their partners." He was working now at a catering company across the river in Vancouver, Washington. I knew this not because I followed his life, but because Portland is the size it is and people talk. He was talented. He would probably build something again eventually, slower this time, on somebody else's financing. I genuinely wished him the ordinary luck that ordinary people need to get through ordinary days. His mother had called me once, about 2 months after the court hearing. She had been warmer than I expected, or perhaps just more honest. She said she had not known the extent of what had happened and that she was sorry. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was doing well. She said she believed me. I appreciated that she did not ask me to forgive him on a schedule. I set my phone face down on the desk and looked out the window at the rain on the glass and the green hills beyond the river. I thought about the version of me who had sat on the edge of a bed with a screenshot on her phone, not crying, just calculating. I had felt very alone in that moment. I remember that. The specific weight of being the only person in the room who understood the full shape of what was happening. What I know now, what I would tell that version of myself if I could, is that the aloneness was not a weakness. It was information. When you are the only one in a room who understands the full shape of what is happening, that is not a crisis. That is an advantage. The mistake is mourning it when you could be using it. I got up from my desk and walked down the hallway to the main floor. The space was full in the middle of the afternoon. Women at laptops and in small group meetings, a workshop running in the back studio, someone on the phone by the window with a notepad full of numbers, working something out. Rosa was at the front desk. She had come to work for me 3 months ago, after the catering company my husband had pivoted to decided not to bring on the front-of-house staff. She was excellent at her job, and she made very good coffee, and she had the kind of professional discretion that I had come to understand was genuinely rare. She looked up when I came around the corner. "There is a woman here for the 2 o'clock intake," she said. "First time. She drove up from Eugene this morning." I looked toward the small seating area by the window. A woman about my age was sitting very straight in one of the chairs, her coat still on, her bag on her lap. She looked like someone who had made a very long decision to come here and was not entirely sure what came next. I recognized that posture. I had worn it myself. I walked over and sat down across from her and I held out my hand. "I am Diana," I said. "Thank you for coming in." She shook my hand. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were steady in the way that eyes get when someone has been crying for a long time and has recently, deliberately, stopped. "I do not even know where to start," she said. I smiled at her. "Most people say that," I told her. "Start wherever you are." She took a breath and she started. And in the window behind us, the rain came down on a city full of women who were figuring out, one calculation at a time, that the ground beneath them belonged to them all along. They just had to read the fine print to find out. If this story made you feel something, if you have ever been underestimated by someone you trusted, I want you to know that your resources and your clarity are your greatest power. Like this video, subscribe to Recovery Stories, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. The comeback is always built on what they thought they took from you.